A slap landed across my left cheek. I collapsed to the hardwood floor, my face burning with a sharp, stinging pain, my ears ringing violently. My name is Fiona. I am 32 years old, and for a long time I had been trapped in a living nightmare behind closed doors. Before I could even catch my breath, my husband hurled a thick stack of legal documents right at my face. The sharp edges of the white papers, a quitclaim deed meant to strip away the only house my late mother had left me, scattered all over the floor. "Sign these papers before I get back," he roared, his massive frame towering over me, his face twisted in pure rage. He leaned down and grabbed me by the collar of my shirt, pulling me close. "Listen to me very carefully," he hissed, his eyes cold and ruthless. "If I come home tonight and don't see your signature on that dotted line, I am taking our 6-year-old daughter out of state immediately. I have connections in Texas. You will never, ever find her again. Try me." He shoved me back to the floor and stormed out, slamming the front door so hard the windows rattled. He thought he had won. He thought I was completely broken and cornered. But that night, when he came home expecting a defeated wife, he was absolutely terrified by the person standing in front of him in the dark. If you want to see exactly how the tables turned and how a brutal manipulator walked right into his own trap, please hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support is the best motivation for us to bring you more powerful and satisfying stories of survival. Stay tuned. The roar of Jerry's SUV engine faded down the quiet suburban street, leaving me trembling as I gathered the scattered papers from the floor. I stared at the bold letters printed across the top page. It was a quitclaim deed. This document was specifically drafted to surrender my legal rights to the house here in Coral Springs. This property was never a marital asset. It was my separate inheritance passed down directly from my mother just a few months ago. Under Florida law, Jerry had zero claim to it. He could not sell the property, leverage it, or touch a single dime of its equity unless I physically signed that line. He knew the law perfectly well. That was exactly why he resorted to pure intimidation. To be honest, I did not care about the house. I would have gladly handed over the keys if it meant buying my peace. But my paralysis stemmed entirely from the chilling threat he had just spat at me. I knew Jerry was not bluffing. Over the past month, he had systematically confiscated Mabel's most vital documents. Her social security card, her birth certificate, and her passport had all vanished from our shared filing cabinet. He locked them inside his private home office, a room I was strictly forbidden to enter. Whenever I brought up divorce, he weaponized his financial dominance. He boasted that he would hire the most aggressive attorneys in the state to drag out a custody battle until I was completely bankrupt. Or worse, he would just take her. The thought of never seeing my 6-year-old daughter again completely crushed my spirit. As I placed the papers on the kitchen counter, my mind started piecing together the bizarre habits I had ignored for years. Why was my husband so deeply paranoid about controlling identity documents? And then, there was his wardrobe. We lived in Florida. The summer heat was notoriously brutal, yet Jerry never wore short sleeves. Not once. Even at the beach, he wore long-sleeved linen shirts. He flatly refused to go swimming in the community pool with Mabel. Whenever I asked him why he dressed like that in the sweltering heat, he would snap at me to stop asking stupid questions. At the time, I brushed it off as a weird personal quirk. Now a cold shiver ran down my spine. It felt like I was living with a complete stranger. My phone suddenly vibrated against the marble countertop. The screen lit up with a text message from Sharon, my mother-in-law. I did not even have to open it to know what it said. The preview showed her calling me a selfish wife who refused to help her husband build a future. She constantly badgered me, claiming I was ungrateful for holding onto a house instead of funding Jerry's business. Normally, her toxic words would make me second-guess myself. Today, I swiped the notification away without a second thought. Sharon's petty insults meant absolutely nothing right now. I walked down the hallway and pushed open Mabel's bedroom door. She was sitting on her playmat, entirely focused on a coloring book. She looked up, her innocent eyes completely unaware of the nightmare unfolding around us. I forced a smile, hiding the shaking in my hands. I sat down next to her, picking up a crayon to join her. I needed this brief moment of normalcy to anchor my sanity. Every time I looked at her small face, the reality of Jerry's threat echoed in my head. He had the money. He had the documents. He had the sheer ruthlessness to ruin me. I realized I was entirely isolated. Jerry had spent years subtly cutting me off from my friends. He controlled the bank accounts, monitoring every grocery receipt. I was a hostage in a very comfortable suburban prison. I stayed in Mabel's room for a while, listening to her chatter about her favorite cartoons. My mind was spinning through possible escape routes, but every door felt locked. I stood up, kissed Mabel on the forehead, and walked into the bathroom to wash my face. The cold water did little to ease the stinging pain on my cheek, serving as a harsh physical reminder of the deadline imposed on me. Almost 11 in the morning, the doorbell chimed, just as I was frantically dabbing concealer over the red mark on my left cheek. I froze my breath, catching the makeup sponge hovering near my face. I walked quietly to the door and peeked through the peephole. It was Declan, my younger brother. He stood on the porch holding a brightly wrapped package. Declan was a federal agent. He had mentioned briefly a few days ago that he was wrapping up a major field operation in Miami. Coral Springs was right on his route back north, and he had decided to drop by unannounced to deliver a belated birthday present for Mabel. Panic surged through my chest. I took a deep breath, pasted a fake smile on my face, and pulled the door open. "Hey, sis," Declan greeted cheerfully, stepping inside. "Miami traffic was an absolute nightmare today. Where is the birthday girl?" "She is playing in her room," I replied quickly, keeping my face angled slightly away from him. I closed the door and headed toward the kitchen to create some distance. "Do you want some water before you go see her?" "Sure, thanks," he said. I grabbed a tall glass from the cabinet, but my hands were trembling so violently that the glass rattled against the granite countertop. I gripped the water pitcher with both hands, desperately trying to steady myself, but a few drops spilled over the edge. I turned around to hand him the drink, still keeping my gaze fixed firmly on the floor. Declan reached out to take the glass from my hands. His sudden movement caught my peripheral vision. Without thinking, pure survival instinct took over. I flinched. My shoulders hunched up, and I yanked my arms back, bracing for a physical strike. The glass slipped from my grip and shattered into pieces on the hardwood floor. Dead silence filled the kitchen. Declan stood completely frozen. The cheerful brotherly smile vanished from his face, entirely replaced by a look of sheer shock. He knew that specific reaction. He had seen it in terrified victims during his federal investigations. "Fiona," he said. His voice was no longer casual. It was low, careful, and incredibly steady. "Look at me." I kept my head down, staring at the broken glass, tears welling up in my eyes. He stepped closer, moving deliberately so he would not startle me again. He reached out and gently wrapped his hand around my right wrist. I tried to pull away out of habit, but his grip, though soft, was unyielding. As he lifted my arm, the sleeve of my gray cardigan slid down to my elbow. The harsh kitchen light exposed the brutal truth. Dark purple and fading yellow bruises painted my forearm with distinct finger marks deeply pressed into my skin. Declan's breath hitched. He gently tilted my chin up, forcing me to look him in the eye. His trained eyes immediately caught the uneven layer of concealer on my cheek and the fresh swelling underneath. For a moment, he was just my little brother. His jaw clenched tight and his eyes filled with a heartbreaking mix of deep sorrow and explosive rage. He pulled me into a tight embrace. The emotional dam broke. I collapsed against his chest and sobbed uncontrollably. Years of pent-up terror poured out in jagged gasps. I told him everything. I told him about the morning's violence, but mostly I cried about the impending threat. I told him Jerry was going to take Mabel out of the state tonight, and I would never see her again. Declan just held me, letting me cry until my tears finally ran dry. He patted my back, whispering that I was safe now that he was here. When I finally pulled away to wipe my face, the atmosphere in the room shifted abruptly. Declan stood up straight. His posture stiffened, his shoulders squared, and the raw emotion in his face evaporated. His eyes turned ice-cold, sharp, and intensely calculating. The heartbroken brother was gone. The federal investigator had just clocked in. "He thinks he can steal my niece," Declan asked, his tone devoid of any warmth, carrying a deadly edge. He pulled his secure phone from his jacket pocket. "Go sit on the couch, Fiona. Drink a glass of water. I need to make a phone call." "This house is solely in your name, right?" Declan asked, his tone entirely legal and professional. I nodded without hesitation. I confirmed that the property was legally mine, inherited directly from my mother, and Jerry's name was nowhere on the title or the deed. Declan pulled a small notepad from his inside jacket pocket. He looked at me with strict federal clarity. He explained that under the Fourth Amendment, a legal homeowner can grant voluntary verbal consent for a search of the premises. Since I held the sole legal authority over the property, I possessed the absolute right to allow him access to any room inside it, including the home office Jerry kept strictly off limits. I gave Declan my explicit, uncoerced permission to bypass the lock and retrieve Mabel's identification documents. We walked down the hallway to the heavy oak door. Jerry always kept it secured with an industrial deadbolt. Declan did not kick the door down or use brute force. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek, compact set of metal tension wrenches and picks. He knelt quietly in front of the keyhole. Within seconds, the internal pins clicked into place. The deadbolt slid back with a heavy thud. Declan pushed the door open, revealing a room smelling faintly of stale coffee and expensive cologne. "Stay right there at the threshold, Fiona," Declan instructed, his voice dropping to a low, authoritative whisper. He reached into his jacket again and pulled out a pair of black nitrile gloves, snapping them tightly onto his hands. He did not ransack the room. He operated with the precise, methodical discipline of a trained investigator preserving a potential crime scene. He pulled out his secure phone and took wide-angle photographs of the desk, the filing cabinets, and the general layout before touching a single item. Declan moved directly to the massive mahogany desk in the center of the room. He bypassed a secondary lock on the bottom right drawer and slid it open smoothly. He carefully shifted a stack of mundane tax folders. Beneath them lay a thick, waterproof envelope. He opened the flap and pulled out the contents. I let out a shaky breath. It was Mabel's birth certificate, her social security card, and her passport. The leverage Jerry planned to use against me was finally out of his reach. Declan handed the envelope to me. I clutched it against my chest, feeling a massive wave of relief wash over my body, but Declan did not stop searching. His gloved fingers probed the bottom of the seemingly empty drawer. He pressed against the wooden panel, discovering a false bottom. He wedged a flathead pick into the tight seam and popped the thin wooden board loose. Beneath it sat a heavy, fireproof metal lockbox. Declan picked the simple combination dial in under a minute. The heavy lid popped open. Inside, stacked neatly in thick rubber bands, were dozens of high-limit credit cards and forged driver's licenses. I leaned forward, my heart pounding violently against my ribs. None of the cards bore my husband's name. They were issued to men named Arthur Vance, Thomas Reed, and David Cole. My husband was living a multitude of phantom lives right under my roof. Then Declan pulled out a photograph tucked beneath the plastic cards. It was an older, slightly faded, glossy print. He held it up to the desk lamp. I stared intently at the image. It was Jerry sitting in a dimly lit bar holding a pint of beer. He looked younger, but his face was unmistakable. However, it was not his face that made my blood run instantly cold. In the photo, Jerry wore a short-sleeved t-shirt. His left forearm was fully exposed. Stretching from his inner elbow down to his wrist was a massive, dark, crescent-shaped birthmark. It looked like a jagged burn scar. It was the exact reason he obsessively wore long sleeves in the brutal Florida heat. He was hiding a distinct, highly identifiable physical marker. Declan did not say a word. His jaw locked tightly. He placed the photograph flat on the desk next to the fake credit cards. He held his phone directly above them, snapping several high-resolution pictures to capture every detail. He opened an encrypted federal communication application attached to the images and typed a rapid message to his colleague Garrett at the bureau. He hit send, initiating an immediate biometric and financial database run. Declan locked his phone screen and slipped it back into his pocket, his eyes fixed on the evidence. More than an hour passed in tense silence before the encrypted communication app on Declan's phone finally flashed. The sudden vibration startled me. Declan immediately unlocked the device, his eyes darting across the screen. The message was from Garrett back at the bureau. It was brief and urgent. The crescent birthmark and preliminary facial recognition algorithms match an active wanted profile. Insert your token, log into the system, and see for yourself. Declan did not say a word. He walked over to his tactical backpack resting on the kitchen island and pulled out a slim government-issued laptop. He set it down on the granite counter, flipped the lid open, and inserted a USB biometric security key into the side port. A fingerprint scan granted him access. The screen illuminated the dim room, displaying the login portal for the National Crime Information Center database. His fingers flew across the keyboard, typing a complex string of passcodes to bypass the standard firewalls. I stood up from the couch and slowly approached the counter, my stomach tying itself into tight knots. Declan pressed the enter key. A heavily redacted federal dossier loaded on the screen. He turned the laptop slightly so I could easily see it. A glaring red banner stretched across the top, marking the subject as a high-priority fugitive. Beneath it was a mugshot. The man staring back with dead, calculating eyes was unquestionably my husband. However, the name registered on the file was not Jerry. It read, Elias Thorne. My knees went completely weak. For 7 consecutive years, the FBI had been actively hunting the man I married. He was not a struggling investment consultant. He was the identified ringleader of a sophisticated financial fraud and document forgery syndicate operating across state lines. The rap sheet detailed his operations, fabricating identities, exploiting real estate loopholes, and laundering stolen funds through offshore shell accounts. But the most alarming detail was his current financial status. The intelligence reports indicated his criminal enterprise had recently collapsed. He was drowning in massive debts, hunted not only by federal authorities, but by dangerous underground creditors demanding immediate payment. The man living under my roof was a cornered, desperate criminal rapidly running out of time. Every single argument about money, every demand to control my paycheck, every secretive phone call he took outside, it all made perfect, sickening sense. I had been sharing a bed with a con artist who viewed me solely as a financial shield. Declan closed the laptop and walked swiftly back into the home office. I followed right on his heels. He reached into the false bottom of the desk drawer and retrieved a flat black leather portfolio he had bypassed earlier. He unzipped the main compartment and pulled out a small navy blue booklet. He handed it to me. It was a freshly printed passport. I opened the cover and the air was instantly knocked out of my lungs. My 6-year-old daughter's innocent face looked back at me from the identification page. The name printed next to Mabel's picture was completely fake. Beneath the forged document lay a folded sheet of paper. Declan unfolded it and laid it flat on the mahogany desk. It was a confirmed flight itinerary. The booking showed 2 one-way tickets to South America scheduled to depart at 6 o'clock tomorrow morning. Jerry was never making empty threats to simply gain leverage. He had meticulously orchestrated his permanent escape. The entire puzzle clicked into place with horrifying clarity. His violent demand for the quitclaim deed had a very specific purpose. Once I signed away my rights to the Coral Springs house, he intended to use the legal document to secure a massive, immediate cash payout from unregulated hard money lenders. These underground creditors did not require standard background checks. They only needed a signed deed to hand over hundreds of thousands of dollars in a matter of hours. He planned to take the illicit cash grab Mabel in the middle of the night and board an international flight before the banks even opened. He was going to vanish across international borders, leaving me to face his financial ruin alone, completely stripped of my only child. I dropped the forged passport onto the desk. A cold, absolute rage replaced every ounce of fear in my body. I looked at Declan, my hands clenching into tight fists. The weeping, terrified wife who had cowered on the floor just hours ago was dead. I was ready to tear his carefully constructed world apart. As the Coral Springs sky began to darken into a deep, heavy purple, an unmarked telecommunications van quietly pulled up to the curb, parking exactly 2 houses down from our driveway. Inside my house, the atmosphere shifted instantly from frantic panic into calculated high-stakes precision. I nervously asked Declan if we needed to dial 911 and bring in the local police department. He immediately shook his head, his expression deadpan and strictly professional. "Absolutely no local cops," he instructed, his tone leaving no room for argument. This escalated into a federal fugitive operation the second that NCIC database hit came back on my screen. Jerry is deeply paranoid, highly experienced in evading law enforcement, and possesses fake identification. If local dispatch radios broadcast a domestic disturbance at this address, he will likely intercept those open police scanner frequencies. He will dump his vehicle, disappear into the wind, and we might never find him again. Instead, Declan had coordinated a specialized FBI tactical team. They were actively staging inside the unmarked van and quietly surrounding the entire perimeter of the property, maintaining strict radio silence. They were not responding to a simple domestic dispute. They were preparing to execute a high-risk federal arrest warrant on the fugitive known as Elias Thorne. My role in this operation was strictly containment. Declan ordered me to grab the envelope containing Mabel's real documents and take my daughter directly into the master bedroom. "Lock the door and do not come out no matter what you hear happening out here," he commanded, his eyes locking onto mine to ensure I understood the gravity of the situation. I nodded, scooped Mabel up in my arms, and carried her swiftly down the hall. I shut the solid oak door behind us, driving the heavy deadbolt firmly into place. I sat on the edge of the mattress in the pitch black, holding my daughter tightly against my chest. She wrapped her small arms around my neck, trusting me entirely. I whispered that we were playing a special quiet game of hide-and-seek, and that she had to be perfectly still. I clutched her real birth certificate and passport in my trembling hand, my heart hammering violently against my ribs as I counted every agonizingly slow passing second. Back in the main living area, the physical trap was being meticulously set. A technical agent slipped silently through the back patio door carrying a small equipment bag. Within 90 seconds, he planted 2 high-definition micro-cameras in the living room air vents, linked the live video feed directly to the tactical van outside, and vanished back into the shadows. The entire interior was now under federal surveillance. Declan then finalized the ultimate deception. He reached onto the hallway coat rack and grabbed my thin gray hooded knit cardigan. We shared similar genetics. Our heights and shoulder builds were remarkably close, especially from a distance. He pulled the oversized fabric over his tactical vest and pulled the hood up, obscuring the back of his head completely. He pressed his finger to his concealed earpiece, running a quick audio check with the tactical team outside, and verified the safety on his service weapon. He even slumped his shoulders slightly, deliberately mimicking my exact posture of defeat. Declan moved systematically through the house, killing every single light switch. Total darkness swallowed the interior, save for the faint amber glow of the street lamp bleeding through the drawn window blinds. He walked over and positioned himself strategically in the far corner of the dining room, intentionally facing away from the front entrance. It was the exact isolated corner I always retreated into whenever Jerry erupted into one of his violent, destructive rages. Jerry expected to walk in and find a terrified, broken woman cowering in the dark. He expected complete submission. The house fell completely silent. The air grew heavy and thick with anticipation. Outside, the neighborhood remained eerily quiet, entirely unaware of the federal net drawn around the property. Inside, Declan stood absolutely motionless in the shadows, his muscles coiled and ready. The trap was locked, loaded, and patiently waiting for the predator to step blindly inside. At exactly 8:30 in the evening, the heavy front door lock clicked and aggressively turned, signaling the predator had returned. The brass hinges groaned loudly as the door swung open, hitting the drywall with a sharp thud. Heavy footsteps immediately stomped onto the entryway rug. Jerry stepped inside, breathing heavily. He dropped his leather briefcase onto the floor, the metal buckles clanking harshly in the absolute dark. "Fiona!" He yelled, his voice echoing aggressively through the pitch-black hallway. "Why are all the damn lights off?" He did not even bother reaching for the wall switch. He was already fueled by his own arrogant rage, expecting immediate compliance. He walked further into the living room, his heavy boots thudding against the hardwood floor. "I am not playing games with you tonight," he roared, pacing angrily near the sofa. "Where are the papers? You better have signed that deed, or I swear I am dragging Mabel out of her bed right now. You think I was joking about Texas? Get out here." The house remained completely silent. Jerry stopped pacing. He turned his head, his eyes slowly adjusting to the faint amber glow of the street lamp bleeding through the drawn window blinds. That was when he spotted the silhouette. A figure draped in my oversized gray hooded cardigan stood huddled in the far corner of the dining room. The figure faced the wall, shoulders slumped, absolutely motionless. It was the exact picture of a defeated, terrified wife. Jerry let out a loud, mocking scoff. He mistook the calculated silence for paralyzing fear. He believed his psychological warfare had worked perfectly. He marched toward the dining room, his aggression escalating with every single step. He wanted to physically enforce his dominance one last time before taking the money and running. He closed the distance in mere seconds. Instead of striking blindly, he reached out with his left hand and violently grabbed the thick fabric of the gray shoulder. He yanked the figure backward with brutal, unforgiving force, fully intending to spin me around. Simultaneously, he raised his right hand high into the air, curling his fingers, preparing to deliver a devastating slap across the face. "I told you to sign the papers!" he bellowed, swinging his arm downward. The moment Jerry committed to the physical strike, the illusion shattered. The hooded figure did not cower or scream. Declan spun around with blinding speed. Before Jerry's hand could even travel halfway down, Declan intercepted the strike. He blocked the incoming arm, grabbed Jerry's raised wrist with an iron grip, and locked the joint securely. Declan applied a sharp, brutal twist, forcing a sudden gasp of pain out of Jerry's lungs. Jerry's eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated terror as he stared into the face of a highly trained federal agent instead of his helpless wife. He tried to pull back, but he was completely trapped. Declan did not give him a single fraction of a second to recover. He stepped swiftly into Jerry's guard, hooked his leg behind Jerry's knee, and executed a flawless tactical takedown. The momentum sent Jerry crashing hard onto the glass dining table. The heavy impact rattled the wooden frame loudly. Declan instantly pinned the side of Jerry's face directly against the cold glass, driving his knee heavily into the man's lower back. He twisted the captured arm painfully high between Jerry's shoulder blades, completely immobilizing him. Jerry thrashed wildly against the table, kicking his legs and screaming panicked profanities. He was entirely disoriented, completely unaware of the massive federal net closing around him. Suddenly, brilliant red laser sights sliced through the gaps in the window blinds, dancing frantically across Jerry's back and the living room walls. The front door was violently kicked open. "FBI, nobody move. Keep your hands where we can see them." A specialized tactical team flooded into the house. The blinding beams of weapon-mounted flashlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the chaotic scene. Heavily armored agents swarmed the dining room, surrounding the table with their assault rifles raised and aimed directly at the struggling fugitive. Sitting safely behind the locked bedroom door, I covered Mabel's ears as the muffled shouts echoed through the drywall. Up in the ceiling, the hidden micro-cameras captured the entire sequence flawlessly. Jerry's verbal extortion, his physical assault, and his ultimate takedown were permanently recorded on a secure federal server. The cold steel handcuffs clicked tightly around Jerry's wrists, permanently stripping away the toxic power he had once imposed on this house. Two heavily armored federal agents gripped his shoulders aggressively, marching him out the front door. He did not yell or threaten me anymore. His arrogant facade had entirely crumbled, replaced by the pathetic, trembling reality of a defeated fugitive. He was shoved into the back of an unmarked transport vehicle, the heavy metal doors slamming shut and sealing his fate. Inside the house, the tactical team transitioned seamlessly into an evidence recovery unit. Declan directed the agents straight to the Home Office. They officially confiscated the fireproof lockbox, bagging the fake credit cards, the forged identification documents, and the fraudulent passport bearing Mabel's innocent face. Every piece of illicit leverage Jerry had painstakingly built was cataloged and removed from the property. Declan paused at the front door before leaving with his team, pulling me into a brief, tight hug. The immediate physical danger was finally over, but the systemic fallout was just beginning to unfold. The federal dragnet did not just stop with Jerry. Early the next morning, FBI agents knocked forcefully on Sharon and Beth's doors. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law were abruptly hauled into sterile federal interrogation rooms. The authorities aggressively questioned them regarding their knowledge of Elias Thorne's criminal syndicate and the continuous flow of illicit funds funding their comfortable lifestyles. They completely panicked under the intense federal pressure. They sobbed uncontrollably, pointed fingers at each other, and claimed total ignorance of the fraud. Ultimately, the prosecutors determined there was insufficient concrete paper trail to formally indict them for money laundering. However, they did not walk away unscathed. The federal investigation triggered an immediate, indefinite freeze on all their bank accounts, retirement funds, and physical assets. Their pristine social reputations in their local community were thoroughly obliterated overnight when the FBI raid became public gossip. Most importantly, their personal ATM was gone forever. Cut off from Jerry's stolen money, they faced absolute financial ruin and looming bankruptcies. In their desperation, Sharon and Beth left dozens of frantic, crying voicemails on my phone begging for emergency loans and forgiveness. They expected the submissive, obedient wife to bail them out. I did not even listen to the pathetic recordings. I permanently blocked their numbers, cutting the toxic cord without a single ounce of hesitation. Several months later, the crushing weight of the American justice system took full effect. Jerry sat rotting in a maximum security federal detention center, completely denied bail by a strict federal judge. He faced a massive list of federal indictments, practically guaranteeing he would spend the next few decades behind bars without the possibility of early parole. His severe felony status and the undeniable video evidence of his extortion and violent assault made my legal battle incredibly straightforward. My attorney aggressively pushed the paperwork through the family court system. A judge swiftly granted an absolute divorce. More importantly, the court awarded me sole legal and physical custody of Mabel, permanently severing Jerry's parental rights. He could never weaponize the legal system against us again. I stood on the front porch of my Coral Springs house holding a steaming mug of coffee. A gentle, warm Florida breeze rustled through the palm trees, carrying the scent of blooming jasmine. Inside my bedroom, locked securely inside a heavy steel safe, sat the original deed to this property. It was legally, financially, and undisputedly mine. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the crisp morning air. Down on the driveway, Mabel laughed brightly as she drew colorful shapes on the concrete with sidewalk chalk. The heavy shadow of fear that had suffocated our lives for years was entirely gone. We were no longer hostages hiding in our own home. I watched my daughter play freely under the bright morning sun, feeling a profound sense of unbreakable peace. I had fought back, survived the nightmare, and secured our future. I was never looking back.